Okay, we are recording and transcribing, so let's give it a pause a minute, and then I'll kick us off, and we'll get going here. Welcome back to Fire Talks. My name is Chris Brunette. I'm Chief of Fire and Life Safety with the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control. We get on Fire Talks here to talk about all things fire, and today I have two very special guests with me. I have Kelly Campbell and Carrie Larson. Both are part of the new Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code Board, and we are here to talk about that, the Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code Board, as well as the code that board has developed. And specifically, we're going to be talking a little bit about insurance and how it's affected not only how the board addressed the code, but also how the code is maybe going to help with insurance. So I'm happy to have you both with me today. I'm just going to have you take a minute and introduce yourselves, and I'll start with you, Kelly.
Thank you, Chris. My name is Kelly Campbell. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Fair Plan, and I am a member, obviously, of the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board. I've been in insurance for almost 30 years. And I can tell you, Chris, I don't know that anybody wakes up and says, hey, I want to be in insurance when I grow up. I think it's something you kind of come into naturally. I grew up, our family owns a farm. So I think as a farmer's daughter, I've always had risk management as a part of the fabric of my being. And so I think that's how I ultimately came into insurance, is really understanding risk, what its impacts are, and how to mitigate it. And that's really the perspective that I've brought to the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board, is how can we reduce the losses? We know the world is getting riskier. We know that there are risks outside of our control, but what can we do within our control to help make sure that one of our most valuable assets, our homes, are protected, and that the communities that our kids go to school in and that our friends are in and that we live in, what can we do to make sure that our communities are protected as well? So that's a little bit of how I got started in insurance and kind of the lens I bring to the Code Board.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so glad that you could join us. And I think I can speak for a lot of the board to say that we were so glad that you were part of our board. You brought so many perspectives, and were so insightful, especially when it came to insurance and insurability. And it was just helped throughout the process. And we were grateful to have you. And again, I'm grateful to have you on today. The other person I'm grateful to have on with us is Carrie Larson, and I will let her introduce herself. Carrie?
Thanks, Chris. My name is Carrie Larson. I am the administrator of the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board. I'm working with the Division of Fire Prevention and Control in that role. And, you know, I grew up in Colorado. I've lived here most of my life. And I went through schooling and got my master's degree in Homeland Security, Emergency Management, and Disaster Preparedness, really taking a look at just the hazards and the risks that exist. And part of my passion is, you know, looking through that lens and applying it to the state of Colorado to, in the best of our abilities, support our communities and make our state just a little more resilient to kind of what Kelly talked about, those changing risks that we're seeing. So that's really how I got into this position. Really excited to be working with the board. I think they've done some incredible work over the last couple of years. And I think this code is really a big step in the right direction for the state. And, you know, it's been a big opportunity for me to just learn from so many experts like both of you, just on different aspects that need to be considered when we get into the development of this code and how it's applied. So it's been a lot of fun, and I'm excited to have, you know, share with everyone how we got into some of these conversations around insurance and what that really meant for us.
Thank you, Carrie. I have to say your idea of fun and my idea of fun are two totally different things. But I do want to say that nobody could have handled coordinating and motivating this board better than you did. For those of you who didn't any of our meetings, this is a 24-person board, all of which are volunteers. They come from all backgrounds, a lot of different areas in Colorado. They represent different communities. they all had their own opinions, but Carrie made sure that the whole group worked together and collaborated in a short time frame, what I would say is a short time frame for developing a code, and really kept everybody directed and on pace to be able to create and adopt this code by July 1st of 2025. It was a pretty major undertaking, and she handled it so well, and we're lucky to have her. So with that, I suppose I should mention, many of our listeners know that I'm the Chief of Fire and Life Safety with the division, but as it relates to this board, I do represent the Department of Public Safety as the ex officio member for that entity. I'm not a voting member, but I do get to participate in these discussions and help develop this code, and I'm just proud to be a part of it. So with that, I kind of want to jump into some other topics here, but related topics. And Kelly, I wanted to start with you. Maybe just for our listeners, can you give us an overview of the history and background of homeowners insurance in Colorado? Have developments in science been made? Have developments in science made any differences related to that? And then talk a little bit about IBHS and who they are and how they relate to insurance, if you would.
Absolutely, Chris. Yeah, I think I'm going to step back a little bit and give just a little more history of insurance in general, and then talk about how that's played out specifically here in Colorado, and really taking some of the lessons that we've learned across the country and utilize that science that we have and entities like IBHS to really bring those principles here to Colorado. So just to give a brief history of insurance and how insurance has evolved, I think it's helpful to understand all the different dynamics that come into play when you're talking insurance. When fire insurance initially came to be, it was a very simple product. Honestly, it was a medallion that you stuck on your house, and if that building started to burn and the fire service came along and saw that you had that medallion, they would put out the fire. So it really was like a shared fire service. And so that was kind of the beginnings of fire insurance and kind of the beginnings of how we protected property. Now we know a lot more about firefighting and loss mitigation and how to protect your property. We also have a lot more financial risk out there. And so as a result, the property insurance product itself has expanded. It covers a lot more causes of loss or things that can hurt your house. So it's not just fire, it's also wind and hail and a variety of other things. It also covers you if you do damage to someone else's property. There can be some liability, or if you do something where someone is hurt on your property, you cause damage to someone, there could be coverage under your liability policy on your homeowner's insurance. So because the coverage of your homeowner's insurance has expanded so much, the factors that impact how much you pay for insurance has also increased. So for example, as we've all seen, the cost to rebuild a home or to do remodeling on a home or any of those things has increased, also impacts the cost of insurance. So all of these cost drivers that we see in a lot of different spaces in our economy are also impacting how much you pay for insurance. And then also what we're seeing happen with Mother Nature. I mean, this winter in Colorado is a perfect example. So little snow, we're seeing Mother Nature take on some different patterns. Then there are more chances for your home to be impacted by natural disasters. So, we're seeing the things that can impact insurance broaden significantly. And that's ultimately what consumers are feeling. They're seeing those cost drivers. They're seeing that greater risk. So they might be seeing insurers who may not want to take on risks in certain areas. So because of the broad-based coverage that insurance provides, there's a lot of factors that impact how much a consumer pays for insurance and how available that insurance product may be. So one of the key events that really impacted insurance was actually back in the early 90s with Hurricane Andrew down in Florida. Mass losses, significant impact from Hurricane Andrew. But what we learned from that is that there are ways that you can reduce risk. And the insurance industry wanted to find out more about that. So they actually created an entity called IBHS, Institute for Business and Home Safety. And the purpose of IBHS is to try and find out those scientifically proven methods that can protect your property. So they have a great facility down in North Carolina, and it really started out focused on hurricanes. So they had these big wind machines, and so they would say, hey, what can you do to a home to make sure that the roof doesn't blow off in the middle of a hurricane? And they found certain things, strapping down a roof, using certain screws instead of nails, that there were a variety of things that could be done, some of them very simple things that could reduce the risk as a result of hurricanes. In addition to that, we found that, so if there are these building methods that we could use, what if we turn those into codes? And we made that in certain areas part of the building codes to make sure that homes built in those areas are more resilient. So then we started to see the impact on all the coastal states of bringing in building codes and how that reduced the losses as a result of hurricanes. Then we started to see bigger fires. We started to see greater insured losses as a result of fire. And so then IBHS began to research in the same manner, hey, what can we do to help reduce the loss from fire? What can we do to reduce these mega fires that we're starting to see? And so that's how we started to really dig into the research of wildfire preparedness. And we're starting to see that, in fact, there are specific steps you can take in the building process to reduce the risk of fire. I think one of the biggest things is fences and wooden fences. We saw how this played out in the Marshall Fire. Wooden fences became the wick that took the fire from one house to the next. If we have a non-combustible fence attaching homes, then we have reduced that fuel for the fire to get from one house to another. You can also do simple things like put screens and vents to make sure that embers can't get underneath those roofs. So we did learn that there are some of these very simple things that you can do to reduce the risk of fire. IBHS has created a program called Wildfire Prepared Home. They've built out a program that individual homeowners can do. They've also put together wildfire prepared communities that communities can do to help make sure their homes and their communities are more resistant or more resilient. We've seen this work in hurricane prone areas. We've expanded the science to wildfire. We've learned so much about wildfire mitigation, especially in the last 7 to 8 years. What we understand about mitigation, what we understand about clearing vegetation, what we understand about those small things between homes that can move fire quickly from one home to another has changed dramatically. And we have a really unique opportunity with the Wildfire Resiliency Code to bring that science to Colorado to make Colorado more resilient.
Thank you, Kelly. That was an amazing overview of that. And I got to say, I had the opportunity in October of 2023 to visit the IBHS facility down in North Carolina. And you aren't kidding. The research that they're doing there is really driving, the main body of work that's going into these types of resiliency codes. They do wonderful work down there, and some of the smartest people I've met are working at that facility. And I'm glad that you brought up the fact that the environment is changing. Things are changing. Things are not improving, especially along the wildfire lines. I want to just bring up some historical facts just for Colorado here to really drive that home. So, you can find this on our DFPC website, dfpc.colorado.gov, and you will find these couple of Colorado fire history facts. So, did you know that 20 of the 20 largest fires that have occurred in Colorado have occurred since 2001? 16 of those have occurred since 2008. 15 of those top 20 largest wildfires have occurred since 2012. 11 of those have occurred just since 2016. 9 of the top 20 largest wildland fires have occurred since 2018. And 4 of the 5 largest have occurred in the past 5 years. It's pretty amazing to think. And so you talk about how the fires are changing, they're getting bigger, they're getting more destructive, and we're starting to see that. Not to mention the fact that we're starting to see conflagrations occur. And conflagrations are, let me explain what that is. So when we talk about wildland urban interface fires, that is fires that are generated in wildland, and they are going into our communities and catching homes and buildings on fire. When we talk about a conflagration is when the homes become the fuel or the buildings become the fuel, and this is building to building ignition. And so that's when you're seeing the large destructive events, such as what happened with the Marshall Fire or what happened in Paradise Hills in California. We're starting to see more and more of these, and a lot of it is we're building homes closer together, we're using more affordable materials, and we really aren't thinking about that home to home or building to building ignition as much as we used to. And so it's something that we're starting to think about, and in fact there's been quite a few discussions lately on what we are terming the wildfire initiated community conflagrations. So we're starting to recognize that these wildfires are initiating these conflagrations, and we're trying to figure out how we can better become more resilient to those. I do want to point out that many of the resiliency codes, wildfire resiliency codes that we are developing are really talking about that wildfire to single structure ignition. That's what it's addressing. But now the community is starting to talk more about that conflagration and how we address that as well. So that's coming. It's been part of the discussion, but at this point, we're really trying to address that wildfire to single structure ignition. And so I want to make that distinction, especially as it relates to our 2025 Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code, as really we were trying to address that wildfire to structure ignition. And maybe later we'll start to look at really that structure to structure ignition that we're seeing with these conflagrations. But with that, I do have a question for Carrie. And those of you who are just joining us, this is Fire Talks with the Division of Fire Prevention and Control. This is Chris Brunette, as always. And joining me today are Carrie Larson, the Board Administrator for the Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code Board, as well as Kelly Campbell. She is one of our board members. And for you, Carrie, I just wanted to ask, we have this new Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code, and much of the discussion when it was being developed was how will insurance accessibility and affordability be impacted by the code? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think you and Kelly have both kind of highlighted a lot of the background that led up to why the code was recommended to begin with and why we established this board. In our establishing statute, we were tasked with a mission to reduce risk to communities through the adoption of a code. And some of the things that we needed to consider included the fiscal impacts, those costs of a wildfire code, both the benefits and potential challenges. And it was kind of an easy ask when it came to considering insurance, because we hear so many stories, especially in the last few years, not just in Colorado, but in a lot of other states, about, their personal experience with their insurance and how their insurance has changed or been dropped throughout their experiences because of hazards that we've seen, not just with wildfires, but that is an impact. And, maybe we can get into that a little bit more later. But the statute also asked us to look at not just when a wildfire turns to a conflagration and the change that happens there, but also ensuring that a conflagration doesn't turn into a wildfire. And so we're looking at this from both directions when we developed the code. And one of the things I think that we constantly brought up was, what is the intent of the code? How are we considering that when we also are looking at these insurance experiences throughout the state? And how do we address the challenges that people are facing with insurance through this code? How much can it help? What changes do we need to make? What information can we receive that will better inform the board to be able to make those decisions? And I think, some of the things that we really considered, we looked a lot at the largest fires, the most destructive fire events that we've seen across the United States in the past few years. We looked at a lot of the post-event reports, the situation reports from the Lahaina fire, from the LA fire, and also from the Marshall fire here in Colorado from a few years earlier. We took a look at all of the reports that were issued after those fires occurred and what lessons were learned from that. We took those into consideration. They came from FEMA. They were those MAT reports that come out. We also, that information was utilized by IBHS in a lot of their research when they were creating some of their recommendations for those Wildfire Prepared Home Plus, tied in with all the testing that they've done. So the board took into consideration a lot of those reports. There was a lot of reading, quite a bit of technical research that they were sifting through that helped lead them to the decisions that they ended up making. We also, again, we talked a lot about, and we heard a lot of anecdotes about people, or they themselves or friends of theirs or someone that they knew who had lost their insurance or who were seeing increases in their insurance. And some of this research that we had read is showing that the adoption of standardized codes or practices in communities, it falls back to what Kelly was talking about earlier, where there is this kind of a community aspect and a social contract that we have just by living in our own communities, in our neighborhoods, that we need to do everything we can, yes, to protect our own properties, but we also need to do what we can to protect our neighboring properties. Because if your neighbor has protected their home, that protection extends a little bit to your property as well, and vice versa. So it is this kind of social contract in your neighborhood. The more resilient every home in that neighborhood is, the more resilient the entire community is. And that doesn't pertain just to the homes. It also extends to your commercial structures, your businesses, and ultimately your way of life in the community you live in, the economy of the area that you live, and the state as a whole. So we're looking at these as wildfires don't follow boundaries. They don't care about property lines. It just occurs, and it will spread whichever way it's going to. It's not going to stop at a parcel just because someone wants it to. It's going to take active action to make those stops happen. And so that's where we talk about these social contracts. That came up a lot in the conversations. And so, I think I might just open it up, Chris and Kelly, to both of you. When we were having some of those conversations, was there anything that stuck out to you or that stuck with you that made you either change how you approached some of these conversations or the requirements we were considering, or just helped solidify an opinion, helped frame a requirement, or where the code was applied? We had a lot of discussion about, is the entire state the WUI, or is the WUI just in specific areas? And how does insurance impact that? So that was one conversation we had. But I'm curious if there was anything that really stood out to you guys in those conversations that came up probably at every single board meeting that we had over the last couple of years.
It's a really good question, Carrie, and I'm glad that you asked it. I do want to back up a little bit just quickly to something you said about boundaries and fire not respecting boundaries. And I think that's something important to pause on. And one reason why I thought that having this statewide code for Colorado was so important is because fire doesn't respect boundaries. We're dealing with 375 different fire departments in Colorado and 64 different counties. And the wildfire isn't going to stop at the boundaries of any of those. They're going to continue on through each of those jurisdictions or each of those counties if it's burning in those areas, regardless of what those boundaries are. And so we really did need something where everybody is working together and have this, as you framed it, a social contract where regardless of where the fire is occurring, we all have a responsibility to do something about it. And so that's where it becomes so important to have this. We can apply this statewide and start to build out the resiliency of the state from corner to corner and top to bottom, side to side. It's just so important. And I think as we worked through that, we always did this through several different lenses. We had several things we tried to think about as we were making decisions on this board, as I recall. Insurance was one of them. As we talked about the different elements that went into this code, we really thought about what's going to be impactful when it comes to affordability and attainability of insurance. And so we often did lean on the body of research from IBHS to help us out with that. But that was just one lens. Like I said, we wanted to look at the affordability of building materials, as well as, what's really going to make the biggest, what's going to be the biggest factor related to safety? What are those items that are going to move the needle furthest when it comes to safety? And so trying to balance all those things, I think the board did a very good job of that, and really tried to keep all those things in mind. But Kelly, did you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, gosh, I've learned so much from being a part of the code board. And I think really to better understand, what other people are worried about with insurance, right? I guess sitting on the insurance side of the fence, like I understand what the industry is concerned about, how the industry views risk. The industry is generally, I often call them the canary in the coal mine, because they demonstrate the industry. When you have an industry market, we have an insurance market that is in stress or in trouble, that's usually a result of a riskier environment. And so from the insurance perspective, the fact that we're having challenges in the insurance market, we think is a reflection of the greater risk that we're seeing in Colorado. But there's also very much that consumer side of the coin that's important to also bring into consideration. And you hit on a lot of those key components, Chris. I mean, the cost of it. What does this mean to me? What does this mean to my home? And so making sure that we can have that clear dialogue to understand what in the code is going to impact individual consumers, and what on the code is really going to work on that community level, and really understanding all of those different widgets in the machine. And I think really where that came into focus for me were a lot of the conversations around the mapping. And what does the map mean? If I'm on this side of the line, what does that mean for me? Is that going to impact my insurance if I'm considered in a high risk area? So, I do think it opened the door to some dialogue that wasn't happening, that needed to happen, both from the industry perspective and hopefully from the consumer perspective as well. So I guess that's the piece that was really eye-opening to me, is really kind of understanding all those different conversations, how they were happening, and perhaps how we could influence them and educate folks and really understand what the concerns are from different individuals, different communities across the state.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing, guys. I think, it's been such a transformation that we've seen in how we've had some of these conversations over the last couple of years, at least from my perspective, just listening in. And I think, you're right. We definitely heard a lot of different concerns that were raised, and those concerns then got brought into those board meeting conversations that, is it something that we're missing? Do we need to reevaluate something? Or is it something that we had an assumption was known, but maybe it's because we're too in the weeds in the code development itself that we live and breathe this. And maybe someone else just wasn't aware. Like, they don't know how this map may or may not be used by insurance companies. And so that concern getting raised was something that we realized we needed to make more of an effort on outreach, with just explaining how an insurer will look at underwriting and assess risk. And is this something that they're going to use? And ultimately, we coordinated with the Division of Insurance. We talked to other insurers and insurance representatives. And no, this map isn't going to be used by insurance companies for the singular purpose of underwriting and making those assessments. This is really just for the application of the code, and insurance companies have their own methodologies, their own maps, their own models that are telling them what they need to know in order to make the decisions that they're making. But that was just one example of something that, a concern was raised, and it led the board to take a different action, which was just more outreach, more education.
And one thing that we should be reminded of with community risk reduction is that enforcement, such as a code, the application of a code, is just one approach to a whole ecosystem of approaches to help reduce risks and to mitigate some of the hazards that we're seeing in our communities. And so you bring up education, that is another approach. We also have engineering, such as, putting in fire breaks within our wildland to help, reduce the risk of fires crossing certain areas. And of course, we have our emergency responders who are always going to be called upon whenever we have a wildland fire. And then, of course, economic incentive, which is a little bit of what we're talking about with insurance. If we can do those things within our communities to reduce this risk and ensure that our insurance remains affordable and attainable, then we're meeting all those. So I just want us to keep in mind that although we're talking an awful lot about this code, it's not the only way to reduce the risk. And for example, I'll just give another example. The state of Colorado in general it's got a initiative called Live Wildfire Ready. It's a program of the state of Colorado. There are several agencies who contribute to this, including the Colorado State Forest Service and the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control, Colorado State Fire Chiefs, as well as some of our federal partners, like the Federal Forest Service and the U.S. Department of the Interior. But then we have local partners, such as Fire Adapted Colorado, all of whom are contributing to this initiative. And it's just a good way for homeowners to really learn how to live wildfire ready. And so if you're interested, you can just Google Live Wildfire Ready. And it's just another way that homeowners and really even business owners can go and start to look at additional ways they can mitigate and help reduce these risks in our communities. So just want people to remember that. I don't know if either of you have additional resources that you want to share related to that, but there are innovative solutions out there that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, Chris, I think everyone's always looking for the magic silver bullet that's going to fix it and overall reduce the risk. And we know that that magic bullet doesn't exist. We know that it is going to take that layered approach, and it is going to take education, understanding. It's going to make changes in the built environment. It's going to take all of those things happening to really ultimately reduce that overall risk. But we also know that we have some really good tools in the toolbox to do all of those things. And the resiliency code is just one of those. But done in conjunction with those other pieces can make a real impact in Colorado.
Yeah, thank you. Carrie, any additional thoughts there?
No, I think, you guys have really covered it. This is a lot of what we talk about in my area of expertise, in that disaster and emergency management, of just how much there is in a lead up and recovery from a disaster event. So you have the preparedness, you have the mitigation, and then there's the initial response, and then there's the recovery, the rebuilding efforts. And when you start looking at that kind of approach, it is the planning, preparedness, and mitigation, that this is kind of where the education and the codes lie. And we're trying to layer that with, if in the event a disaster occurs, then the rebuild, the recovery is simpler, it's more efficient, it's ideally more affordable because of some of the other things that we've put in place at the beginning and pre-event. So, I think it ties into a lot of different areas, and that's why we have so many different voices on the board, is to bring those different perspectives and to bring the different resources that are available in this larger strategy to reducing risk for the state of Colorado.
Well said. Thank you, Carrie. Well, we are just about out of time here on Fire Talks. I want to give you each one last opportunity to maybe speak to anything that we didn't talk about that you thought might be important. And if you don't have anything, that's okay too. But Kelly, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm still struck by some of the fire statistics that you gave. I think that that's also what we're seeing in the insurance industry. We're seeing larger, more expensive catastrophes. We're seeing a new normal when it comes to risk. And so now really is the time to try and reduce that risk, to try and change those trends and that curve, to make Colorado more resilient. There's been so many great conversations and people coming to the table, the diversity of the board, as well as the members of the public that have been engaged in the stakeholder process throughout the development of the code. I think that's what's really created the good code that we have, and that really that great foundation for a stronger Colorado. And by having that, I do believe that some of the challenges that folks are facing in the insurance industry, those availability and affordability challenges, by putting that right foundation in place, that's how we can change that trend line as well. So it's exciting. I think there's a lot of positive elements ahead for Colorado, and the code and the process of developing the code, I think, are great illustrations of the good things we have in Colorado.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in as well. I think, we've seen a lot of changes over the course of the last couple of decades in Colorado, and a lot of that is in response to some of these events that we've seen. But I think, one thing to keep in mind is, as Kelly said, there's not one single silver bullet. We've talked about that layered strategy to reducing risk. This code is one of those, but it is a longer term solution because it's applying to those new developments. So we're not asking anyone to retrofit their entire communities. We're looking at the current developments, new developments that are going in, making sure that those are adding a layer of risk reduction in terms of their communities where they're being established. Now, there are some things that I think individuals can look into to have a faster potential effect on their individual insurance. And one of those things is what you guys have brought up already, which is the Wildfire Prepared Homes, Wildfire Prepared Homes Plus, Wildfire Neighborhoods, that are certification programs from IBHS that I believe are coming to Colorado this year in 2026. So, you know, if someone is looking to do as much as they can for their own individual parcel property or for their community, then and that's in an established community, then they can start looking at those standards that exist and take that information and what they've done and talk to their insurance company and say, this is what I've been working on. This is what I've done. It's a really great resource to look at. And a lot of that information we took and used in the development of this Colorado code. So we wouldn't see a significant deviation from the IBHS standards in most of the requirements that we have in the Colorado code. So take a look at the Wildfire Prepared Homes programs, talk to your insurers, and see if there's some negotiations that you can have or conversations about what steps you can do for a more immediate impact than this longer term solution of the statewide code.
Yeah, and I hope everybody will take the opportunity and take a look at the new 2025 Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code. As we've talked about today, so much work went into that and a lot of thought into how not only we can help prepare our communities to be more resilient to wildland fire, but do it in a way that will help us ensure insurability and affordability of insurance. All that thought went into it. So hopefully someday you'll pick up a copy of that code and just take a look at what all it entails. But with that, we are out of time today for Fire Talks. I am so glad that you could join us today. And I am so grateful to both of our guests today, Kelly Campbell. She is the Executive Director of the Colorado Fair Plan and also represents the insurance industry on the Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code Board, as well as Carrie Larson, who is our administrator for the code board. I'm so grateful you both could join us today. Thank you so much. And for everybody listening, thanks for joining us. Take care. Bye.